Let's talk about intrinsic cognitive load versus extraneous cognitive load. Okay, so the idea of intrinsic cognitive load is basically socializing students over time to a concept. Okay, so um, so if I write a sentence, you might not get it because it's in Portuguese. Because you don't have the vocabulary in Portuguese to understand it, to manage the content, right? That's kind of the example that they're giving in your textbook about managing that intrinsic, that interactive complex system. And you're only allowed to you're only processing 2 to 4 bits of information at a time. In this case, it's overload, right? Because you don't really know until we actually have a strategy, right, in place. So let's say if I say A equals 1, mar is the verb to smoke, and lado means side. So assuming you already have knowledge of these, you might be able to piece together the other words. Or if you know the other words, you might be able to piece together now what it means if you already had some of the skill set. So then in this case, I know I can use basically previous knowledge, cobra. What do you think a cobra is? Yep, you're right, it's a snake. So one snake, I'm going to skip over that. One snake, two smoke. Para is very close to Spanish. In this case, it's at. Seu, right? Could be another form of Latin word of sua, something like that. Side. So a snake to smoke at your side. So it's actually meant to be kind of a metaphorical phrase in Portuguese, so it's not meant to be easily understood. But the idea here is, given a certain amount of context and scaffolding, right, then you can figure out what the rest of the words mean. So it means a snake will smoke at your side. It's the equivalent of watch out, because you're treading on thin ice, which is another lovely metaphorical phrase. So again, in terms of this type of process, if we're talking about intrinsic cognitive load, it is unavoidable because students are learning new concepts all the time, but the idea is to make the progression a fairly linear one in terms of how we build up the steps. Like I said before, it's kind of like baby steps when we're talking about the behavioralism component of it in terms of making change. Cognitively, it can be the same thing. We can talk about steps up in a process for us to be able to do that. If we take a look at the other one, and let's do this instead. Okay, so if we take a look at the other one, imagine, if you will, that I'm working on the board in the classroom. All right, so it doesn't matter what kind of board, smart boards, chalkboard, whiteboard, etc. Okay, so I'm just going to insert a table to kind of represent that process. So I'm going to use 3 columns, and I'm going to use a whole bunch of, well, actually just use 1, because then you'll get the idea. Okay, and then I'm just going to make this disappear for a second. Okay, so imagine I'm a teacher and I'm talking about frogs. That's my concept. And then, so in frogs, as I'm writing on the board, as I'm going through the process, I'm talking about, all the stuff that goes with frogs. So they're green. They're amphibious. They can regenerate. Love my spelling. They can regenerate. They're omnivores. I don't know, I'm assuming. At this point. Okay, etc. So I'm going through all these characters and traits. And then I decide to go, hey, let's talk about snakes. So I run out of space on the board. I go over, I talk about snakes. So snakes. Okay, so just so you guys get the idea. So snakes, this, that, this, and the other thing. And they go, hey, let's talk about frogs again. And then I start listing, again, a bunch of whole other traits or concepts. So the problem is, because I'm not clustering things together or chunking information together, that kind of creates the extraneous cognitive load, because I'm putting something that's dissimilar in the middle of two things that are meant to be really one. So that causes kind of a processing issue. That's why when we do assessment, we usually cluster together, say, if we're dealing with addition of fractions, all the addition of fractions will be together rather than addition, subtraction, multiplication haphazardly. So we can cluster together the mechanism, so the student's using all the mechanism, all the function for calculating that particular calculation or function. And then we go on to a different process, right? So we have, subtraction first, then we have addition, and then we have multiplication. But we're clumping the problems together. Same thing with your textbook. Your textbook doesn't go all over the map in any given textbook. It goes hopefully systematically based on one theme, then another theme, then another theme, then another theme, then a summary and review. It's just because of cognitive load, because we don't want extraneous variables to get in the way of chunking together information.